Welcome to the Singer's Guide podcast with me, Tessa. This is the show for ambitious singers who want more than just scales and song practice. We'll talk about the things regular singing lessons don't always have time to cover. Because being a singer is about more than just your voice. It's about confidence, preparation, and all the little skills that make performing effortless. I'm excited to be your guide and your fellow traveller as we explore them all. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to episode 9 of the Singer's Guide podcast. My name is Tessa, and today I thought we would take a quick look at how to look after your voice, the best practices, the best things to do for general day-to-day, making sure that your voice is in good condition, but also when you feel like something is coming on, maybe you're getting the beginning of a cold, or maybe you're feeling tired and burned out. And then finally, the options for if you are unwell and you still have to sing. And we'll talk about that a little bit more during the episode because obviously there's some nuance there. But the reason that I wanted to talk about this today is because I'm recording in December 2025, and in the UK it feels like so many people are unwell. There is a flu going around, there's obviously seasonal colds, there is COVID, and then there's just this general sense of like tiredness and burnout, which of course then makes your body more susceptible to getting colds and flus. And so I thought it would be a good topic to cover. I'm going to try and keep it brief because I too am feeling a little under the weather and I'd like to have a rest today before I pick up my children because it's the last day of school before quite a long amount of time where they're going to be very excited because it's Christmas and New Year and all those things. So let's just get into it. The general day-to-day how to make sure that your voice is in tip-top condition are things that we probably all know. They feel quite boring, but I'm going to say them anyway. We need a good level of hydration. We want to drink enough water every day. We need good sleep. We need to make sure that we are warming up and cooling down. And remember, if you need any help with those, warming up was episode 1 of this podcast and cooling down is episode 4. I'm going to check that. Yes, episode 4. We also want to be working on our technique within our practice sessions, with lessons if we're having them, to make sure that we have a sustainable way of singing and ways to counteract any habits that we might be trying to eliminate. So for example, if you tend to have quite a tight tongue, I'm speaking from experience, then maybe we want to be building in stretches throughout the day to make sure that we release some of that tension. That is going to help us maintain a sustainable practice day to day. Now, I recognize that some of that stuff is not very fun. And as I said, I talked about it in episode 1 and episode 4 about warming up and cooling down and the ways that we can work with ourselves to make stuff like that more interesting. But I know that as a gigging musician or as somebody who enjoys social events, that sometimes those things that we know that are really good for us, like getting a good night's sleep or not drinking too much alcohol, staying hydrated, they can feel less fun. And so sometimes those things drop to the wayside and we get to a point as singers where we feel like that fatigue or that illness is creeping in. And so the kind of next level of things that I want to talk about is when you feel that illness, that cold or that fatigue creeping in, which, if I'm honest, is how I've felt most of December and probably some of November as well. Things have been threatening, maybe like a tickle in the throat or a little bit of a stuffy nose, and you think, uh-oh. These are the things that I do in that circumstance to try and avoid a full-on, oh no, I've got a gig, how am I going to perform? So yes, doubling down, making sure that warming up takes priority, cooling down also takes priority. We're really making sure that we're doing best practice there. Prioritizing sleep and rest. So, for example, where I can, I have cancelled things, not gigs, not teaching, but anything where I was like, oh, well, I was going to go to the climbing wall then, but you know what? Instead, I'm going to rest. Really kind of storing up my energy for the things that I need, that are paying me, that I want to do because it's my career. Making sure that I am getting lots of vitamins and eating really well. All of those things that, as I say, we know we should be doing, but sometimes they fall by the wayside. We can also be upping our hydration. You may have heard about steaming or nebulizers, and that's the best way to get hydration directly to your vocal folds. So drinking water, obviously fantastic, but it doesn't actually touch the voice. And if we think about our body, if our body is needing water, it's going to prioritize that hydration going to the places that need it first, the big organs, the things like your brain and your heart. And we're going to get that hydration into the vocal folds, but it won't be the first thing that's hydrated. So if we want to get anything directly in to the vocal folds to maybe reduce inflammation or soothe it in any way, hydrate it more, then steaming or nebulizing is the way to go. Now, I don't own a steamer or a nebulizer, but I do own a hot shower. So I sometimes spend a little bit longer in there, or I can get a bowl of hot water or a teapot and use a towel over my head, breathe in the steam. That's a really good way of being hydrated. Sometimes, however, it doesn't matter how much hydration and vitamin C and sleep you prioritize. The inevitable happens and you do become ill. So what can we do in those situations? Now, obviously, there is an ethical question here as to whether you should still go and work, because you might infect other people. And we know from the pandemic in 2020 how important it is to be thinking about other people when we're ill. I'm going to put that aside and I'm going to talk about if you are ill but you are going to work, what can you do in those circumstances? And I know, as I say, there's a bigger question there, and obviously resting is the best thing, not pushing yourself, but sometimes we might have to. And so these are the things that I would prioritize if I really wasn't feeling well, but I was well enough to sing and needed to sing. So if we're talking firstly practice, in those circumstances, I would prioritize quiet or silent practice. If I still felt up to it, I still wanted to, I decided that rest wasn't my only option, I would be using things like the QUIET Practice Toolkit, which I talked about in episode 5, and the link for is down in the show notes. It is a free resource that gives you 3 different ways to practice that don't use your voice at all. I would be also focusing again on that sustainable technique stuff, the stuff that I know is best practice that is not going to make whatever's going on with my voice worse. I might lower the intensity of the practice that I'm doing. Maybe mixed belt is not for today, but I can still do SOVT work. I can do musicianship. I can work on, scales or improvisation, those kinds of things. If we're talking performance specifically, there are a couple of things that we can also do to help try and mitigate the circumstance that we're in. So we can swap out repertoire. We can change keys. If you need any help on changing keys, that was episode 2. Oh my goodness. All of these episodes that I've made are so helpful. So you can change the key, lower things. You can change repertoire so that you're using easier songs instead of challenging yourself. You can also create opt-downs. You may have heard of the opt-up in musical theatre, for example, where, there are more impressive high notes or fancier riffs. But we can have the opposite. We can have easier ways to approach melodies. This is obviously much easier in genres such as pop or jazz, where you have more ability to improvise within the repertoire, but you can make melodies simpler. You can bring the melody notes down. So even if you can't change the key, you can make the song easier. Again, I talk about that within that podcast episode about changing keys. And maybe again, in a gig situation, you might, if you're performing with live musicians, you might rely more heavily on the musicians who are with you on the stand. So maybe the piano player takes more of a solo, maybe you're in a function band and there's another singer, and you ask them if they can just take a little bit more of the weight of the work to help you get to the end of the show. As I say, it's not ideal to have to work when you're ill, but if you do have to, there are things that we can do. And then after the show, we prioritize again getting a really good night's sleep. We rest as much as we can. We definitely do a cool down. I would say that over and over again, but especially I did a gig a couple of nights ago. As I said, I'm very tired. There's like a little bit of a cold threatening. I made sure, because it was a late one, that I drank water. I had as much sleep as possible, and I definitely did a cool down. So all of these things become even more important the more unwell you feel. So whilst I hope that you stay healthy and well and you do not get struck down by any seasonal colds, flus or anything else, there are some tips there should you need them. And as I say, all of those things that are good for the voice to help us be well within our bodies, because our bodies and our voices and our minds are so connected that we can't really sort of separate them. Those things can help us whether we're ill or not, but then definitely when we might be feeling a little under the weather. So I hope that's helpful. And before I sign off, don't forget, I've been asking every episode this season for you to tell me, what do you wish that you had learned sooner in your singing journey? What is something where you're like, yeah, I'd have saved myself a lot of stress or a lot of pain if I'd have known that thing. Maybe the fact that cooling down is important and that it becomes more important when you're ill. Maybe you wish that you'd learned to listen to your body more and rest when you needed to. Maybe you wish you'd learned to look at your diary and go, okay, I see that thing at the end of the week. I'm going to prioritize that and cancel these things at the beginning of the week. That is a lesson I learned quite late, I think. Maybe it comes with maturity. I certainly wouldn't have thought that way in the past. So yeah, get in touch. Let me know those things. And as I said, the last episode of this season, which is coming up rapidly, I will talk through some of those things that people have said, and maybe we'll talk about them more in season 2. If you are listening to this in real time and it is December for you, I wish you a very restful, peaceful time over the holidays with good health and lots of exciting gigs that you feel in full voice for. And I will see you next time. Bye. Thanks for tuning in to the Singer's Guide podcast. You'll find all the resources and links from this episode in the show notes. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, and share it with a fellow singer who'd love it too. And don't forget to connect with me on socials at Tessa Smith Music. Keep singing, keep practicing, and I'll see you next time.